adoption, an adoptive parent's perspective of this at-risk population. Now, I'm not going to go into why this population is at risk because our instructor has already done that. I'm presenting the flip side of the coin. This presentation focuses mainly on the process of getting children, what you do when you have them, and tips on a successful post-adoption life. So how does this all work? The legal process from getting the child to completing the adoption can take years. In my case, it took over 3 years to finalize, partly because the birth parents refused to voluntarily terminate, but that's explained in detail in a bit. When there is maltreatment suspected, the state will do an emergency removal of the children. They either place with appropriate family, foster care, or what is known as fictive kin. Fictive kin is a relatively new concept when it comes to placement. These are people who are not biologically related to the child, but have a relationship with them. For example, my friends had custody of 2 little boys because the grandma couldn't take care of them anymore. They spent time with them to get to know them, which made them fictive kin, and eventually they took custody. The boy's mom was pregnant at the time. At birth, the child was removed by the state, and my friends began spending time with the baby in the hospital. This made them fictive kin to the baby. Eventually, the grandmother petitioned for the boys back, and my friends had to return them. The baby was a different story because his case was in a different county. The social worker sided with my friends, and they got to take the baby home. The birth parents signed voluntary termination, and my friends got to adopt their sweet little baby in September. When children are removed from the home, regardless of their placement, the initial goal is always return to parent. It's at this point where the birth parents are given tasks to complete to regain custody of their children. Examples would be regular drug testing, counseling, securing stable housing, securing a job, things of that nature. The children will also have tasks to complete. They call them treatment plans. This is where visitation and phone calls with the birth family are discussed. A fun thing that out-of-home caregivers get to do is life books for each child. This is a visual documentation of the things the kids experience, like going to the zoo or the aquarium or maybe a festival while they're in care. You could simply print pictures for a photo album, or you can go that extra step and scrapbook them like I did. Scrapbooks are wonderful gifts to the children that they will cherish for their lifetime. As a note, if the child is a teenager, I always printed the pictures and provided resources so they could do their own scrapbooking. Each year, when the anniversary of out-of-home placement comes, the case is reviewed to determine if the parents are working their plan, to what extent, and to determine whether the goal should be changed to adoption. The social worker has done periodic reviews and home visits to both the children and the birth family and makes the recommendation. There are also reports from the Citizen Foster Care Review Board that the judge takes into account. Once the goal is changed to adoption, it is a very rare circumstance that it is ever changed back to reunification. In my case, the goal was changed to adoption after the first year. Both parents were incarcerated for much of the time I had the children. My kids' parents chose not to terminate, so we had to have a termination hearing. I had to testify. This happened almost 2.5 years after they were first placed with me and took an additional year before the adoption was finally finalized. When you are a foster parent, you are required to have hours and hours of training and to continue your training yearly. They'll train you in CPR, safe crisis management, all sorts of things. This is all well and good, but until you live with it and are in the trenches with it every day, you really don't know what you're getting into. In this slide, I'm touching on only 3 diagnoses that I really had no idea about until I became a foster parent. DMDD, which is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, is just a big, broad term for kiddie bipolar. Doctors are very reluctant to diagnose children with bipolar disorder, so they give them this diagnosis. There are highs and there are lows, and for a kid who has endured trauma, finding the balance is difficult and can take years and several different medications to sort out. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a common diagnosis. It's either becoming overdiagnosed or spot on, depending on your perspective. This is a diagnosis where the child seems to be running like a motor, can't sit still, and is basically hanging from the rafters. Now, in my opinion, I think classrooms are too structured for primary children. They don't get enough exercise, and when they get in trouble, what's the first thing that they take? Recess. Not being able to move around causes hyperactivity, and kids have to have an outlet. Reactive attachment disorder. This one is a doozy. No matter how much training you get or reading you do, you will never understand this diagnosis. Kids with RAD are either indiscriminately attached or not attached to caregivers at all. When a child is indiscriminately attached, they do not have stranger danger. Everyone is their best friend. They tell you exactly what you want to hear, but they don't show any real emotion. They're fake. I have a child like this. It is hard for her to maintain relationships. On the other end of the line is the child who is not attached. I have a son who has this faulty attachment due to the neglect he suffered as a baby. When I got him at 22 months old and tried to sit him on my lap, he shook violently because he was scared to death. He did not know what real affection was. Even now, at 10 years old, he doesn't know how to give a proper hug. One day he seems attached to me, the next he couldn't care less if I were his mom. Both types of RAD are just sad and can be prevented. Sexual abuse is not uncommon with foster children. Sometimes that is why they're removed and they will remain vulnerable to these types of situations for the rest of their lives. Sometimes sexual abuse has not been disclosed and the child might disclose to you spontaneously or to a therapist. If this happens, validate their feelings and express that they are not a bad person, but don't forget to report it. Children internalize so many negative feelings. The child might have sexualized behavior, which can happen even if the child wasn't sexually abused. One of my kids used to masturbate when she was bored, and to my knowledge, she was never sexually abused. You don't want to teach the kid that touching their body is bad because that will set up a negative image for the rest of their lives. Instead, set clear boundaries and rules, like telling them to only do it in the bathroom, and definitely not to touch other people. It's good practice not to set children on your lap and never have any secret pacts with children. Kids in foster care have lived a whole dysfunctional life before coming into the normalcy of a foster home. All the things listed in this slide are the things that were seen or felt or experienced by my kids before they came to me. And as you can see, this is a very long list. For some kids, it's even worse. Let's talk about what the foster parents go through. Because of the circumstances surrounding the child being removed, the foster parent may begin to suffer secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, where they begin to mirror their child's behavior. I know I feel traumatized when I have to tell my kid's story. I also feel traumatized when my kids are acting out. Using the word stressed doesn't really describe the way that I feel. It's on a higher level. There is so much frustration a foster parent feels. There's the not knowing what's happening, or the constant change in workers and providers, frustration with the system because we all know it's broken. The most frustration is felt towards the birth parents with the hows and the whys. It really does feel like you're going crazy. Finally, I wanted to give you some tips on making life easier while you're a foster parent or post-adoption. First, Get therapy for all members of the family, including yourself. This keeps you off the ledge, so to speak. Get in a routine. There are some things you do every single day. Try to do those things at the same time every day. These kids have had nothing but dysfunction, so structure will be your best friend. Put the kids in all the sports they want or that you can handle. This wears them out and gives them an outlet for their energy, but more importantly, they become a member of a team. They're included in something. Most foster kids have never done sports or any extracurricular activities. Use tutors or after-school programs. For every placement a child has, they are behind by 6 months. Give them a fighting chance by investing more in their education. Change their diet. I have a friend that swears going gluten-free and giving up red dye has changed her kids' behavior in a positive way. Interventions. Get them ASAP. Some examples of that are First Steps, Head Start Preschool, occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, art therapy. There's a therapy for just about everything. These are all interventions that my children used, and it put them on level playing field with their non-foster peers. Lastly, use respite. I cannot stress this enough. When kids are in foster care, you get 2 days of respite per month. Take that weekend to spend time with your family or do whatever you want, but recharge your battery because you need a break. And those kids need a break from you too. Thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you have any questions, you can email me at mykidsayirock@yahoo.com. Thanks.